This is Michael Woodward, and this is episode 73 of the Jumblethink podcast.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Jumblethink podcast, a podcast all about helping dreamers get to that big idea and dream and create the world they want to live in. Hey there, thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Super excited about our guest. I think you're going to love this episode. Our guest today is Michael Gebben. More about him in a moment. On Thursday's episode, our guest is Christos Shepard. He is a co-founder and CEO, contributor. He created an awesome app called Campfire. Super excited to share that story with you this Thursday. Jumblethink is more than just a podcast. Our goal is to create a community and a culture around enabling people to find their big idea and dream and ultimately reach their potential to change the world. We have some great announcements coming up in the next couple of weeks, and I want to make sure that you don't miss any of them. It's easy to stay in touch. You can swing on over to jumblethink.com, subscribe to our newsletter, or you can go to our social channels on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Make sure you follow or like us there, and you'll be up to date on all the exciting things happening this fall at Jumblethink. Now let's join the conversation I had with our guest today, Michael Gebben. I am super excited about today's guest. His name is Michael Gebben. He is the founder and CEO of Jumpstarters. For 7 years, he created one of the leading YouTube channels around inspiration, and he's got a killer podcast. His story is one of inspiration where he chose to go against comfort, go against the status quo, and push into something deeper, breaking the trap and cage that he made on his own to reach a bigger potential. He speaks a lot on clarity, confidence, and connection, and really at the core of it, he wants to create a life of significance. It's a super fun episode, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. So let's jump into the conversation we had with Michael Gebben. My guest today is Michael Gebben. Super excited to have you on the podcast. Thanks for taking time out to chat with us.
Of course. Well, you have such an awesome name, Michael. I mean, I really try to only do podcasts with Michael, so this is a special privilege. No, I'm kidding.
Makes it a lot easier.
That's right. That's right. All the podcasts are only Michael's. That way, I'm never going to screw up the name. So it's all good.
Well, you have an interesting story of finding identity, I think is the easiest way to say it. You were on a path of one direction for 7 years, created GebbsTV YouTube channel, and you also did a lot of video production for weddings and events and everything like that. And you started to question identity. I love what you say at one point. You created a cage of your own making.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, it's interesting because I think I've always kind of been an entrepreneur more at heart. And although, even a lot of these podcasts I've been on, a lot of the world I'm in comes from the arts and creativity and video production, photography and designers and web and all these types of industries. But what's fascinating is I think that how I fell into video actually came from my dad. And much like I think people become a doctor because their parents are doctors, or lawyers because their parents are lawyers, or, et cetera, et cetera. For me, I mean, I had a paper out when I was, 10 years old. I had a candy machine business in high school. I mean, at one point in time, I did think I was going to go to school for kinesiology to be like a personal trainer at like Bally Total Fitness. Like I was just into all these different things, but always more geared towards some kind of entrepreneurial type of endeavor thing that I was trying. And it was actually my dad, who works at a cemetery, he made movies when I was little. We made movies in high school, but he had the drive and the passion around. He wrote and scripted, the movies. And I happened to be the one who had some technical foresight, if you will, or whatnot, and ran the cameras and did that part. But as a whole, like, I got into the video production company because I got a funeral slideshow I did because the funeral home knew we made these movies and they, asked if we could make a slideshow. It was like a new thing in like 2004-ish. And I did that. And then it was actually my friend's really good friend's parents, the neighbor, asked if Patrick, my friend, could film their wedding. They said, well, no, Michael's the one who, typically films these movies and stuff. And so in 2005, I filmed my first wedding. And so I just kind of fell into this video production thing almost semi-accidentally. And when I graduated, I made $4,000 my junior year, $8,000 my senior year, and I thought, man, if I can make $16,000, I'd be in good shape. And, I told my parents, just give me 1 year. If this whole thing doesn't work out, I can go to college, because it wasn't about going back. I never started. And I really didn't want to go. And I went all in. And, all these years later, it was 2010. I had things going pretty well. I'd filmed a couple hundred weddings. I was basically, GebbsTV was Gebbs Total Video, which stood for exactly that. But everything is what it should have said, Gebbs Total Everything, because we did anything that we could do creatively. If somebody brought in a photo from 1940 that was black and white and broken, we'd try to repair it and bring it to color.
Wow.
And it would take me forever, and I'd charge $25 for it. And so I just was so overwhelmed. The cage came from being so overwhelmed with doing anything for everybody, no matter what they asked, and most of it not being super passionate about. The main thing I found the most joy and excitement around is when I did this thing called a same-day edit, which I shot that day and showed the video that night at the reception of a wedding. And I loved the reaction. I loved how the people seemed to feel. I loved how I felt. I got instant gratification versus doing the wedding and maybe getting an email, maybe somebody going, thanks a lot. That was really enjoyable. But this gave me this instant gratification. I loved interacting with the people. But I did all these other videos because I was influenced from my peers that I should do 10 other videos. And those are the things that I procrastinated on, didn't want to do, didn't get around to, made a million excuses. And essentially, I didn't want to go to the movies. I didn't want to answer the phone. I thought a couple's going to chew me out. Parents are going to chew me out, which, mind you, definitely happened from time to time. And I finally did this thing. I call it this now. I never called it back in the day. It was kind of almost a survival instinct. I was just so fed up with it all. It's I didn't, we got into business to have time, money, and, maybe at the time I thought video production to make the movies. Even though now knowing I didn't really genuinely I liked the final product that would happen, but I didn't like it taking a year to make the movie and then maybe somebody watches it. That's why I loved the same day edit, because I got to do this thing and essentially get to see the reaction quickly. But essentially after I made this thing, I called the my way decision. I said, I'm gonna shoot, edit, speak, dress, do everything my way. It sounded very selfish, but I found I was actually disservicing people by doing whatever they wanted just because they were giving me money, versus me doing what I knew I was great at, what I loved, what I knew other people seemed to love as well. And when I focused on that within those 12 months was when Tim Ferris and Tony Robbins and Richard Branson and all these crazy things started to happen, because I stripped all the stuff that didn't matter, focused on what did, and people felt the passion, the energy, the enthusiasm. And I got my life back and time back and made more money and had more fun. And then that's simultaneously interesting, coincidentally was the time that I also shifted to really wanting to do what we're spending so much more time ultimately doing now, and such a passion of me, which is helping people more do that on purpose rather than so haphazardly and so accidentally. It was so I didn't know what I was doing. I had nobody really helping me do it. And I think what we've ultimately created and what we're helping people do now is because I couldn't find this out there. I even hired coaches, and I had to stop it because the people, it's one guy coined the thing Gebbs juice, because he was more excited to get on the phone call with me than I was to get on the phone call with. He was like, oh, I'm getting this Gebbs juice, man. Can't wait for our next call. I'm like, shit, dude, pardon me. But I'm paying you money, man. So I just found that, people were giving me advice based on very sometimes limited information, but also this idea of what worked for them is going to automatically work for me.
Right.
And so getting into the online space and wanting to coach and mentor and train and help, everybody was just create an online course down my throat. And I didn't build my production company on it was built on relationships and my personality and connecting with people. And that's what I thrive on and love. So when it came to wanting to help people, what's interesting is it came from helping people offline. But then when I wanted to do it on a bigger level, it was all about not doing anything to connect with people, really. It was all about doing it in such a passive income and online business, leverage, scale, and don't connect with people, don't email, don't call, just get their money and and maybe they'll go through your thing or maybe they won't, but who cares? And it's just like, that was so unfulfilling. And so anyways, I'm going to do what I said at the beginning. I'm going to take a breather here and let you chime in.
Well, there's so many different things we could dive off of that and into, and hopefully we'll get to cover all of it. One of the things you talked about was the power of being a specialist. That's one of the things you mentioned in there.
Yep.
That moment where you said, I can be all things to all people. You got a photo and I can make that black and white color and fix it up. Or you got this guy coming in saying, hey, can you do my video shoot? And you're like, yeah, we can do that. And you got somebody else saying, hey, can you do it for the funeral? And you really step back and you start saying, I know what works and I'm going to be a specialist in this area. What is the power of being a specialist over, that all-you-can-eat buffet company?
I think more than ever in this day and age, what's happening is it just keeps getting kind of splintered down. Like, now you got like CrossFit gyms for 40-year-old women who are divorced with 3 kids. I mean, I don't know if I've seen that specifically, but there's some random variation of that stuff happening. And before it was just fitness, right? Like, people just worked out.
Yeah.
Now there's so many variations of fitness, from yoga, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I'm finding is that for us to stick out in this noisy world, is that we need to specialize. I think even the days I've worked with a bunch of agencies and bigger companies, and you're seeing this stuff start to just get where everybody's becoming freelancers. People aren't wanting to have employees. They're not wanting to pay all those extra benefits and all those things. And so, you being able to be great and outstanding at something is very important, but simultaneously understanding where that, like we were talking beforehand, where's your sweet spot?
Right.
Where you can confidently, like, this one guy told me once, he was like, what would you do if you only got paid for the result? Like, if you could not provide that result and do a unbelievable job at it, you would not get paid. Not this, I'm giving you money and then, it doesn't really matter the outcome because I've already paid you. And then I end up with, I'm not happy, but I paid you. And so I just don't use you again or whatever.
Right.
But this idea, if you didn't get paid, if you didn't provide the results, so what would you focus on? And I think that in the beginning, well, it's hard to find what we like or what we should do, and more than likely we're not good at anything. But as you try things and experiment, you're going to start to hone in. You're going to start to have these feelings of like you're gravitating towards one thing or the other. But so many times we are so flooded with so many opinions from other people about what success looks like, how much money we should make, where we should live, what we should do, how we should dress, how we should speak, what kind of business we should have, that we don't really know what we want anymore.
Right.
So I think being that specialist, it allows you to potentially be more in demand, charge more premium rates, these things that when you're like everybody else, you're carbon copy of everybody else, you're not rare. Therefore you're probably not as valuable, because if you're just a commodity, then ultimately I can get that anywhere. If the only differentiator is price, then of course I'm going with the lowest one, which is why I found not recognizing this early on. And one of the things, again, helping people recognize these things is my personality, my blessing and curse of the gift of gab was truly more a blessing. There was more blessings that came with it than there were, bad or negative or quote unquote curse. Because for me, when I talked to a couple back in the day, I'm talking to them for an hour and I'm just pouring in my enthusiasm over the whole thing and learning about them. Whereas the other guy's like, what's the day? How long you need me? How many cameras you want? And they're thinking, I don't know. So rather than asking them what they want, I'm just telling them what I do. Yeah. And the only way I don't know if you can see that thing on my little Skype profile. I think it says rock and roll. I think you can see it.
Yeah.
I'm just coming to rock out your day. Like for me, it's like there's no, there used to be, but when I was at my prime, there was no 4 hour, 6 hour, 8 hour, this, that, and the other thing. It's like when I come, I want to do the best job I possibly can. I don't want you to have to stress or worry about anything with me specifically. And when I blew up, that's what it was. When I blew up outside of weddings, that's what it was. Dealing with the Tony Robbins or these high profile people, it was that certainty and confidence in what I did best and that they would not have to worry about me. and I would show up and do what I did best.
Yeah.
And that's really, I think, at the end of the day, when you can show up with 100% certainty and confidence in what you do best, and then you do that, that's when you can really command the best rates. People will fly you. Like, you mentioned where I was from here in the Midwest, in a little town in Illinois. And like, for me, I've never had to live in New York or LA or San Diego or Florida, these different places to go get the work. These people are flying me to these places where there's people just as talented from the final product standpoint is me. But it is my personality. I mean, there's one I'm doing where they're paying way more to have me. Like, I even gave them another option. The final product's the same, but they want my energy and enthusiasm and passion at that thing.
Right.
And I put so little value on that 95% of my life, because I'm like, it's not about me. It's about whatever it is that I'm delivering. But on certain levels, it is a lot more about you than people give credit to.
Well, let's dive deeper into that, because you mentioned you were doing the TV thing and creating these video assets, and you're creating this new business, still in that process and everything like that of kind of figuring out what that looks like. What is success for you? What does that mean for you, and how do you put that into action every day?
I do this little thing that's gave it the first time in Germany, this talk. The lady, like 30 minutes before, was like, are you ever going to get me the slides? Or no, it was in the morning, which was not much more than 30 minutes before, but I'm an eternal procrastinator. But basically, I came up with this thing, Gebbs, and I made it G for giving, E for expectation, B believing, B best, and then I did a little double S, which isn't really my name, but simple and success. And the success part was, for me, I believe that success so many times for so many people is, you got to 10x to be success. You got to live in this house, make this amount of money, or achieve this result, or do this or do that to achieve success. And I think, okay, so what am I in the meantime? Am I a failure? Am I unsuccessful? Because if I'm not successful right now, there's only so many things you can be that's the opposite of. It's unsuccessful. And I think to live in a state of being unsuccessful until I achieve a result is a very unfulfilling way to live life, which I did versions of that throughout my life. And it was very unfulfilling to have to achieve certain things. And if I'm not achieving those things, like one of the things was, associating my self-worth with the successful, in the eyes of people that I worked with, the people we've already mentioned, some of these names, and having that shift to recognize it doesn't have anything to do with that. Like, people will listen because I'll have that same certainty and confidence I had when I dealt with them. And so therefore, if I have that in delivering the message, it doesn't matter if you know who I've worked for or what I've done. If I'm speaking with that confidence and certainty and belief in what I have to say, you're more than likely going to listen than if I talk all wishy-washy, like I don't really know what I'm talking about. But so success for me is simply just trying, and just honestly, it's very simple for me. I mean, it's just waking up, doing my best each day and trying. And I have to pivot at times in life, and we shift and we do different things. But at the end of the day, at times I don't give up. I like to use the word, and I don't know if this will be the time we bring up what we talked about earlier, but like, it's pivoting for me, because at times it's sometimes we can burn ourselves into the ground by not, quote unquote, giving up. I've invested so much time. I've invested so much money. I've put so much energy into this. I'm going to look like XYZ if I don't, sustain this facade of what people think of me or what I've done or what I've accomplished. But like, are we living our lives for everyone else and what they think of us? Or are we living our lives for the people that matter most? And for me, that's my wife, my little dog, my mom, my dad, my brother, and a couple close people to me. But what I learned is I was living my life for what everybody else perceived of me, like what they thought of me. What if I'm not working with a Tony Robbins, like what will they think? Like if I don't post a picture with some celebrity, they won't think I'm cool. And when in fact it's my wife's aunt who's 90, who does 80 push-ups a day, who's freaking more inspiring than some of these celebrity people that are out there.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating, but I want to keep things simple in my life in regards to being able to be happy, to enjoy life, to be quote unquote successful. It doesn't need, we make things, and I'm the first to do this at times, we make things so complex that our rules are so hard to achieve these, things to be successful that, half the time we feel like crap.
Yeah.
And I don't want to feel that way. So, and I have, don't get me wrong, I have. So.
I can completely relate to what you're saying. And, for me, I think back to when I had my big team of 12 employees working for me, and we're doing massive development for big corporations and everything like that, I would always go into it and I'm going, we are overcomplicating things that should be simple. So simplicity is such a difficult thing to do because it takes intentional, it takes being purposeful. And I think that it's easier sometimes to have all that bloat, that noise that you talked
I think,
about.
can I cut you off for 1 second?
Yeah.
I joked about it in there. Like, for me, it was society makes us think. I worked with companies that, they had $130,000 projects. This was for me, some of these that I was shooting for these companies. And the guy would tell me, he's like, Michael, you're making more money off a $10,000 or $15,000, $20,000 project than sometimes we do almost off a $130,000 project because of our overhead.
Yep.
It's bloated because we need 16 people on set to make it look fancy and whatever. And I see this, all the events I've done, everything that I've done in my life, I see that at the surface, it looks like one thing, but really at the core, I believe at least, there's versions of low self-worth around it. Like, I don't believe that someone, like back in the day with the weddings and the same day edits, I didn't believe at the beginning that people would pay me $3,500 or $4,000 or $5,000 for just the same day edit. Yeah. So I added these 9 or 10 other videos because that, to me, like when I thought, even how do I charge more? My first thing initially was, well, I add more videos. That's how I add more value and I can charge more money. But when I was at that kind of rock bottom place, it was like, screw it, I'm just stripping all these things. I'm going to do this one thing I love, the clients seem to love. That's what I'm going to do. Yeah. And when I did that, that's coincidentally when, the specialty thing, the specialist thing came out, and I really thrived. But I think that on so many levels and so many things, we're afraid to do that one thing that we are great at because we don't think that people will value just that. And until we value just that, people won't value it. And that's why I saw that shift back in the day with video production. And I've started to ultimately, I see that shift now when it's everything I'm doing with Jumpstarters and all that kind of stuff and personal development, coaching and training, because I was the same 19-year-old kid who said, who the heck's going to pay me any money? Like, I'm just some kid. And the fact was, I was a confident guy in video production dealing with these high-profile people getting paid a lot, while then I was the same human being at the same age with no confidence and no certainty in my ability to really help someone, even though I had helped people. But when it came to really charging for it and really believing in what I could do, I really didn't believe. Yeah. I really didn't. It's interesting. Then you're asking other people to believe in themselves when, it's the irony was, like I said, I did believe in myself, but in one area. I had come from not believing to believing and doing well in that area, while starting this other thing, wanting people to achieve that, but yet in that area, not believing and not really but asking others to. It's an interesting contradiction there. Yeah. Because it wasn't like I never achieved anything. And you hear people become coaches or things sometimes, and it's like, let's go to a weekend warrior certification, and they've never really done a business, made any money, or done anything, but they thought it was easier to coach on how to do a business than it was to do the business themselves. Yeah. I had success, quote unquote, in business, but then when it came to helping people do it, it was one of these things where I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I've made videos, helped other people on that level, and I had people I'd spent one-on-one days with where they had done really well, but I thought those were flukes. I didn't think they were that could be repeated. Yeah. I thought they were accidents, but come to find out, it was far less than an accident. It was much more a real intentional, thing that could be repeated. So. Yeah.
Well, and fear is a horrible motivator. Yeah. And I think that's ultimately comes down to is that confidence is staring at a fear and not knowing how to handle it, really.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and I think the fear, The fear is when we lack clarity, like, because we don't know what to do. And so when you've done, like, for me, I'm a very experiential person. So for me, it's hard to sell. It's hard to do things that I haven't at least done once. It doesn't even have to be 1,000,000 times or 100 times or 50 times or 20 times. It just has to be once. No matter how many somebody tells me, no matter what I read, no matter what I hear, no matter any of that. If I haven't experienced it at least one time for myself, I have a really difficult time. That's why I've had some people, I've done things and they're asking for referrals before they've completed their service. I'm like, I'll be one of your greatest assets for referral, but you have done nothing for me right now. I mean, it's been okay all right so far, but like, until you're done, I've been screwed over, Michael, so many times by people who come to find out they referred somebody to me that was so referred from, it was a friend of a friend of a friend. Like, they had never dealt with this person, and really nobody had that they even heard it from. And so what happened is they're telling people, yeah, this person's good because on Facebook they look good and some friends think they're good. And so I needed this service and they're telling me, and then I get screwed over and I'm like, what the heck? And then you go back to them and they're like, oh, I had never worked with them. Or, oh, I got that from such and such and they said that. Or, oh, well, can't you see online? Like, they're really – and that's the whole what you see is what you get sometimes. Anybody can say anything, but can they really do what they're saying they can do? There's a big difference there.
And I think that raises another good question. You've worked with some crazy people. You mentioned, of course, Tim Ferris, Tony Robbins, Pat Flynn, Richard Branson, people that I think many entrepreneurs wish they could get around, wish they could get that FaceTime, wish they could pick their brains. What is one thing that maybe you could shed some wisdom to us about the persona versus the reality of these people and what you really get from that interaction with them?
Well, here's a couple things. One, I can tell you something I have to remind myself on a constant basis. This is one that's going to be how I achieved some of them, which wasn't really that question, but you did ask me it earlier, so I'll tie them both in. Okay. Because I was just with Brendan Bouchard this past weekend and spending a half hour in his hotel room talking to him because he flew me out to film at this Success Live event. And what's interesting is I met him for 30 seconds backstage in 2012. Zero interaction from 2012 till about 3 or 4 months ago. And then I got an email that I honestly thought was a bulk email to his whole audience looking for videographers because it looked a little specific, but it didn't really have enough to say that it was. And then I was like, okay, well, I'll just see what happens, and I'll email back. And he had seen my work with Tony Robbins, and he said he keeps this Rolodex. When he finds awesome people, he just keeps this list, and he makes it designer, photographer, videographer, whatever, as he's meeting people. And whether he ever ends up using them or not is irrelevant. He just wants to have this list. So back in 2012, he saw the video we did for Tony, asked Tony who did it, got my information, and then boom, it just sat there. Yeah. And then I replied back. And so what's interesting with the getting these jobs, the reaching out, or business and things in general, for one, is that patience is everything. I mean, there's been a lot of things that have happened in the last year that happened from planting seeds all the way back to 2011. Wow. That literally, as a whole, from at least a financial perspective, nothing happened from 2011 until 2016. Like, I just kept in touch, saw each other, different things. And then it just came time that they needed me, and I was the guy that they thought of when they needed me or when they needed that specific thing. But in getting that as well, it was always from the G for the giving in the Gebbs thing, which was I just give unconditionally. I mean, Tim Ferris was me feeling like his book had a huge impact after I read it. It was the same year that I made some of these shifts. And I thought, man, if I could meet him and I could give back and I have this skill set of video, I'd love to provide that skill set. So for me, giving almost unconditionally as much as possible. Of course, we'd always hope that things could happen, but I'm also doing it for people not because I feel like I can get something from them. I feel like I've already been given something from them, and I want to actually just give back. And of course, if something cool happens, fantastic. I'd love for something to happen, but that's not my intention behind it. And so, patience and giving and just being in it for the long haul is huge in all that. I would argue that that's some that I've gleaned from them as well, to tie that in, is that if you look at some of these people's careers, even Tony, for example, he's been at this for 30, 40 years now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a long time.
Yeah,
like
that's
some
a
of
long
us
time.
haven't even been alive that long. I've barely been alive that long. I'm 31. So, you know, and I think that, you know, for me, even it's been a little over 10 years. I mean, 2006 was really when I opened Gebbs Total Video, or I really got into business for myself, and I was out of high school. So it's been a little over 10 years, you know? And so in the grand scheme of things, and then I take in coaching or personal development and outside of video production, and like really and truly, it's been 4 or 5 years. You take Jumpstarters. Well, that wasn't even started in 2014. So it's these things. And sometimes though, and even Tony Robbins says, you know, we overestimate what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can do in a decade.
Wow.
And when I think of the 10 or 11 years I've been in business, a lot happened in the latter part, the 6 to 10 to 11 year part, than it did in the first 4 or 5 years, because I was putting in that. You know, I talk about MIA all the time, imperfect action. You know, I didn't call it that or anything back in the day, but like that's what I was doing. I was just, the total was important, I believe, because it was helping me. It helped me try a lot of things. So I wasn't just telling a story in my head that I liked something. I actually knew I liked it or didn't like it. Unfortunately, I was throwing so much at the wall and never stopped throwing at the wall that I never could see what was actually sticking. So it became so clouded and so unclear that I couldn't figure out my own, what my true voice was and what I really loved, because I was letting just everybody and everything influence me, until I was just so fed up. But I think that from these people, one thing I've seen is they have that ability to persevere. They have that persistence. They have that patience, that a lot of people just, they say, I mean, seen a lot of guys that I've reached out to, something popped up in a feed that we had talked, and I was going to do either some coaching or something with them, and you know, they didn't opt to, and I just reached back out years later and just to see what was up. And either one did completely change industries, or two, they just gave up. Yeah. And the reason they gave up, they said, because I couldn't take another no, I couldn't take another it's too much, I couldn't take another we've already found somebody else, or we're not interested, and they couldn't take that anymore, so they stopped and they gave up.
Wow.
And for me, I think that back in the day, if I had to get 5 no's, you got to get 50 today. And that's not to be a Debbie Downer. I just think it's
the reality.
It's the reality. And so, you know, which is good and bad, you know, whichever which way you want to look at it. But I just think that, you know, for me, when people have asked me what is one of my biggest assets, I do believe, outside of a number of things I could bring up, but my ability to get knocked down and get back up, kind of a cliche thing I know I've heard before, but like, there's so much truth to that. Like the amount of crap that that's hit me, that has knocked me down. And then, you know, you're like, oh my gosh, am I going to go back at this? Am I going to do it again? But that's what set me apart, because I think if you're still in the game 5 years, 10 years later, while everybody else is given up, that's when the reputation and the demand and all these things start to build. Like you can create some false demand or different things that you can kind of create on a brand new thing. But is that sustainable? I mean, how many companies have had millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in funding that are gone in 24 months?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talk about, and I think this is really important from what you're talking about here, but you talk about that you curate everything that comes into your life. And you talk about the fact that whether you give an example in one of the videos I caught where you talk about there are some people that you look up to that you've chosen not to keep them in your Instagram or your Twitter feed, because the lifestyle that they live, while there's so many great things that you gain from them, isn't one that you want to replicate. So you don't want to have that feed into what you do.
Oh, Michael, you did some homework there. I'm impressed.
I try.
Everybody is listening. This guy does some work here. Interesting. Yeah. You know, it's fascinating because in 2009, 10, 11, I feel like I got rid of what I considered truly like negative, toxic people that just were not benefiting me in any way, shape, or form. Then recently what you're referring to is I found that there were people that they're not negative. I'll bring up one specifically. I mean, I've met him. I tried to almost at one time, I'll mention his name. Some people will know out of the gate before I mention him. I tried to be the D-Rock to a degree. But one person is Gary Vaynerchuk.
Yeah.
I
was going to let you name the name.
Yeah,
I
that's
wasn't going
fine.
to put
Yeah,
it in your
that's
mouth.
fine. It's all good. I mean, it's a love-hate, which I'm sure some have, and some's only love and some's only hate and whatever. But like, I mean, I've followed him since Crush It, my favorite one was actually Thank You Economy that he did.
Yeah.
But before he was ever Gary Vaynerchuk that everyone knows today, or, lots of people in the entrepreneur space know, I was following him. I filmed him at South by Southwest in like 2010 and reached out. And about a year ago, I was at this Mastermind Talks event that I've been, involved with for a number of years now. And I remember backstage and I brought things up and he goes, dude, it was just timing. Here's one thing about the influencers and big influential people I found. A lot has to do with timing. He goes, that stuff was not on my radar. Like I did not care in any way, shape, or form. Now, I would have never wanted to be D-Rock actually and have that life that he has or have the Gary life in general.
Yeah.
But like I did it at one point in time, I wanted to at least work with Gary the same way I reached out to Tim and Tony and these people. But I just wanted to be able to do a project for him or do a video or do something for him, and did different things and made this one video at South by and sent it. And it was a whole just nothing. But it's the same thing that D-Rock did. But at the time I did it, it was 2-3 years too early. But it's fascinating because he was a person who, for me, I think that we can have enough awareness to try to go, well, I can glean what I need to glean. I can hear what I need to hear. But let's face it, it is very difficult for us in our willpower at times to just kill all the other things that we may not like of something. So if there's somebody that we listen to and go, well, I really don't like about 90% of this person. I'm not saying I don't like 90% of Gary per se, but like, I don't like 90% of this, but I like this 10%.
Yeah.
Can you really do a phenomenal job of ignoring the majority, the 90%, where you just completely like can shut all of it off and not let it affect you in any capacity?
Yeah.
I think it's really, really, really difficult. And what I found with him is, I believe in my heart of hearts and the behind the scenes I've had with Gary, he is a what you see is what you get. He is extremely positive, one of the most positive influencers out there today. And I believe at the core really does care about people. That all being said, I believe there is, there's the way he lives his life and sometimes incongruency with what's being said, because at times I know that he does say, well, you don't have to be like me and be yourself and et cetera, while simultaneously there's this thing around constant hard work and hustle and in that aspect that, if there's nothing, if I'm in a room with nothing but brick walls, top to bottom, left to right, and like they dropped me in and essentially they've closed it. There is no way to get out of this thing. If I just keep punching the brick wall with my fist endlessly, I'm never going to get if that thing's built right or concrete wall, like I'm not getting through it.
Yeah.
So you can just work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week and hustle. But if you're doing it in the wrong areas or like we're saying when the personality stuff, like, he'll even say some people are, anybody can do anything. And I believe that. I don't believe that we should completely ignore resistance or things and try to make everything just easy and effortless. Like I believe we're going to have difficult things, of course, but I think at the same time, there's some things that are just flat out stupid that we're doing because someone told us to do, but we in our hearts actually don't want to do it. So what I'm doing today on this, or what you've seen in videos or whatever, this was not a passion, a like, a desire, a want, anything on my radar 10 years ago. Like there's a video I have from 18 years old in high school to 24 years old to 28.
Yeah, it's a good video. Yeah, I saw it earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, so like that's a different, for all intents and purposes, that's a different person.
Yeah.
Like, and that's because around 2010, 11, the one you see at 24 years old, that's when I really started to make the shift, but it's still night and day from the one you see another, 4 years later. And that's because I wasn't good at any of this. I didn't have the delivery, the enthusiasm in public or on camera or on podcast. I still had a passion. Like I still cared about people, but I was really afraid to be myself and all these kind of things. But that is something I then wanted to genuinely get better at. So I had to do it over and over and over and over. And over time, I got better at it. But I think when we're trying to get better at things only because someone that we might not even know personally is telling us to do something, and we interpret it wrong. Like I brought up Facebook ads before one time, and this guy was like, I ran Facebook ads. It didn't do anything, Michael. And like he wanted to get it for weddings. And it was like he targeted 18 to 65 male and female, single, engaged, married, divorced, everybody.
Yeah.
And it was like he spent like $1,000 and didn't get anything. When we went to 24, 29 female engaged in a certain radius of his home, he booked the wedding in like 24 hours.
Yeah.
And so I think in life, when we're listening to podcasts, when we're reading books, when we're watching videos, when we're, getting information, what's happening is that it's not specific to us. And so typically, there's always nuances to everything in our personalities, in our businesses, in our lives. And when we're doing something, where we live, like all these things do play a part. I'm not saying that we brought up, I live in a town of about 26,000 people, and yet I'm flown to these places where there's, millions of people and thousands of talented people that they could pick from their backyard. But that being said, nuances matter. And I believe that we're taking in information, we're interpreting it in our brain without any guidance around that information. And then we're running into brick walls, or we're doing things that really weren't even what the intention of. I've had people I've even talked to at times that still can misinterpret, let alone something that's not even being told to you specifically that you're interpreting. Like if Gary says something and you interpret what he says in your own way, there's blessings and curses to that. Hopefully it turns into more of a blessing. But I think what I've seen is at times it's more of a curse for people when the information is non-specific to them. And that's even just being at this event, Brendan, this past weekend, and talking to these guys at the top who have access, have huge audiences and all these things. What they're seeing is that people are overloaded with information. And what's happening is people know everything they need to know to succeed in life and business and health. They know what they need to do. But what's happening is they're missing a few elements, and they're maybe even missing that kind of accountability or help or support from someone to push them, to tell them that they have to hold themselves accountable to, versus I bought this book or course and nobody even knows if I opened it, or nobody knows if I read it.
Yeah.
And so,
That's good. That's good. I want to make sure we talk about the Take It MIA stuff that you're doing.
Sure.
Massive Imperfect Actions. I call these like micro experiments where it's definitely trial and error. Tell us about how we can use that to effectively reach our potentials.
Well, so I'll give you the story of this guy, Ronnie, who came through what we're doing with Jumpstarters. And Ronnie basically in 2000, he's about the same age as me. I think he's 30 now. And, in high school, he was specifically into video production and stuff. And all these years he kept dabbling in it, but he never was having much success at all. Wasn't making much money, never really. He still had to have jobs. In the end, he had a job in 2013 that he lost, and he was getting paid really well, but didn't like it. But then he lost, and he thought, all right, this is going to be my hurrah in 2014 to go all in and make this, vision a reality and make this thing finally work. And he said at the end of 2014, he was about $12,000 in debt, and he made about $1,000.
Wow.
And when I met him, I asked, what would you do if you didn't need money? And I like to ask this question of, anybody right now who's listening, like, if you, and I get it, we need money. Money is very important. Money does make things a lot easier on a lot of levels. I get all that. We don't live in this rainbows and unicorns, butterflies world where we don't need money. I understand that 100%. But if you didn't, just imagine for a second, you didn't need any money. Somebody dropped all the money you'd ever need, and everything you'd ever need or want would be paid for. What would you keep doing? What would you start doing? What would you stop doing?
Yeah.
And I asked him that question, and the first thing that came out of his mouth was poker runs. Now, I didn't know what a poker run was.
Yeah.
I thought it was some motorcycle race or something, or something with cards. Like, I don't know. And he goes, no, it's a boat race. And he goes, I've been filming this boat race locally in Atlanta for about 4 years, but I've been doing it for free, but I love it. Like, if I could do these things, this would be awesome. And for me, when I heard that, I'm like, all right, let's get you to be able to do that, because, what you were saying earlier about this whole people, saying, this is just what we should be doing, right? Like, we just need to pay our bills. We need to stay alive, regardless of whether we really are finding fulfillment or enjoyment. And people who make these shifts in life when other people look at you and think that you have what they want, either the money, the lifestyle, whatever, but they don't know that you're maybe miserable and so unfulfilled and not enjoying all this. You just had built this quote unquote cage. And so for him, he's like, if I could do that, that would be everything. And for me, I'm like, okay, because I think that when people, especially in business, we can sometimes, like both of our stories, I'm sure people through your show have heard more of your story. I kind of accidentally fell into this whole thing and then ran with it, and it worked. But I think that sometimes when people right now today are like, well, what do I do? What business should I start? Oh, there's this. So there's an e-commerce business. But at the end of the day, they don't really have passions in these things. They get excited about what the people are selling, which is freedom and time and lifestyle and all these things. And so that's what people want. But how you get those things, there's a lot of hard work that goes into that. And if you completely dislike all of it, you're not going to have a hard time ever getting to the thing they promised. And so what I found is he was trying to do weddings and commercials and all these things. But at the end of the day, he was going through the motions, and he was moving kind of like a rocking chair, though. He's moving back and forth, but he's not moving forward. He's not making progress. He's just going through the motions because other people told him to do it. But MIA-wise, imperfect action, massive action, you're not going to take a lot of action on something you really don't want. So at the end of the day, if he's thinking, God, it's dang, if I get 30 weddings, that's going to really suck. So like, how much action is he going to take to go get a bunch of weddings? Now he's trying to get weddings, and he might not be saying, don't hire me, but his body language, his tonality, all these things are saying, don't hire me, please. Gosh, don't hire me. And so what I found is for him, once we got clear on a number of things, and got into breakthrough, he thought he used to be a used car salesman, so he thought he was a slime ball when he sold. So we overcame that little hiccup in his brain for one, which was interesting. But he had said, I reached out to a bunch of poker runs. It was too much money, or they couldn't afford it, or they didn't want it, or whatever. In 2014, before we met, then we spent a day together, 2015, in April. In September, he closed a $50,000 contract for poker runs.
Wow.
And MIA he took was, rather than reaching out, the story he told me was he reached out to a bunch. The real story was later on, which he came out with, was I really only probably reached out to about 3 or 4 poker runs.
Okay.
When he did the $50,000 contract, the MIA for him was he reached out to every poker run in the United States and Canada and essentially sent them emails. And he got about 10 or 15 to reply. And out of the 10 or 15, one of them did about 50, and he got a contract for 15 for the $50,000 contract. And then he got 2 or 3 that he got single ones for. But he's done this. He just went on a vacation to Iceland and London. He reached out to the BBC and got a little project with the BBC and got paid for it while he was over there. I mean, he's always doing these things. And he goes, here's my MIA, man. And he just because I always say the worst thing that's going to happen is you get a no, and you get a no when you don't ask, you don't try. At least when you try, there's an opportunity for something good to happen. And so when you can remove I'm going to fail, it's not going to work out, or, Tony Robbins, for me, it was like, I was just naive, I think. And I was like, if I would have maybe known how big he was at the time, until now I've adopted this mindset, I wouldn't have reached out. But I didn't really know. And I thought, well, maybe I can meet him, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe I could just do what I did to Tim, which is just send an email. And so I was like, I love your stuff. And, here's what I can do. And I did this. And I actually put the thing for Ferris. And coincidentally, they were trying to do something with this guy who actually made his book trailers, which wasn't working out. So they happened to look at my email, which is a timing thing as well.
Yeah.
And so it's fascinating. But for me, I've found friends of mine who do have large audiences have had actually less people reach out. There's this kind of law of diminishing returns at certain times. So they're not getting double or triple when they were at, say, 500,000 subscribers, and now they're at 1.5 million. They're not getting 3 times as many people reaching out, because the bigger people get sometimes, the more people just go, there's no reason to reach out. They're not even going to reply to me. They're not going to do anything.
Yeah.
And so for me, I've just adopted now this mindset of the MIA and the imperfect action. Everybody's got an opinion, and what do I have to lose? And, sometimes I get lucky, I'll say. And the very first time I do something, I get a reply. While simultaneously, I think I mentioned already, I've had things where I planted the seeds in 2011 and nothing happens for 4 or 5, 6 years.
Yeah.
So it just, but do you have the patience? Do you have the perseverance? Do you have the persistence to push forward when it seems like nothing's working or nothing's happening? While sometimes it may be very true, while other times it really is, but you just don't let it, you don't water, you don't see, we've taken weeds out in our new house that we just moved into. And like sometimes these things, there's like nothing on the surface hardly, just a little bit. And then you point out, gosh, this is really hard to get out. And you look and there's all this, roots that are really long.
Yeah.
Sometimes those roots are really long, but the actual sprout on the outside isn't much. And so you think, it's not working.
That's good. That's really good. Before we jump into the rapid fire questions,
sure.
You have an audiobook and a whole bunch of resources that you're bringing to the market for this concept of massive imperfect actions. How can people find it? How can people connect with you?
Appreciate it. Yeah. On takemia.com. It's real simple. Interestingly enough, it's available. I think it's because people weren't thinking like, take missing in action, take Miami International Airport. Like none of that makes much sense. So take massive imperfect action makes sense. So the URL happened to be available. So takemia.com. But on there's the audiobook for a download. It's one of those things. I'm not really trying to make money off of that. I want to get the message out. So they can get, that there, just download. There's not even any opt-ins or anything on to do that. And then there's t-shirts and some goodies. And then also for people interested, if they want to take the personality assessment that we do and do a call with one of our personality consultants to kind of go over it. Because that's where, for me, the differentiator is just taking an assessment and a PDF being spit out at you and you read it and you're like, oh, that's nice. That sounds kind of like me. Good deal. But rather having someone help you understand it. So that's kind of the first step in our process that we do to work with people. So that's just the thing what I found is even in the people that for myself and the people I've done a lot of work with in this day and age, a lot of people are needing a lot more tastes, if you will, before they're going and ordering the whole menu per se, or ordering everything that they really want. And I mean, I was just at a little bakery the other day and I said, what is that? And she's like, well, here, let me just have you try one, and she gives me one and I ordered 3.
Yeah.
But if she just described it, I'm like, I don't know, but she let me try it. And we've done that. We've had things that have gone from a free project, $2,000 to, $10, $20, $30,000 projects. And so for us, that's just a way of us, really providing massive value. And if you want to go deeper, great. But if not, you can at least get a lot of value out of that call. So you can do that all on takemia.com.
That's great. We'll make sure to have all those links in the episode notes too. So swing on over there and you can click. It's real simple and check out what Michael's doing.
Yeah. And there's also the story real quick. Well, I won't say much about it, but there's there's Ronnie himself telling his actual version of the story. There's a video on that page.
Oh, that's cool.
To see that. So
that's really cool. Let's dive into our rapid fire questions as we move towards the end of this episode. You, I think in a lot of ways, look at life differently than a lot of people. What are some tips that you would give someone with a big idea or dream, and maybe they just don't know where to start?
Oh,
maybe not so rapid fire question.
I'm thinking about the rapid fire part. No, I'll do my best here. I really, when you mentioned fear and we've talked about these different concepts, I mean, I got to reiterate this idea of, I've done a lot of talks where I've asked people if they like Lord of the Rings, actually. I don't know why I brought up Lord of the Rings. It's not even like I used to really like it. I haven't watched it in a long time. But anyways, it's amazing. Like I spoke to 750 troops once. I don't even think there were 5 guys that raised their hands saying they liked the movie.
Oh, wow.
And I've been other ones 50-50 and other ones the whole group. But that whole concept of this imperfect action and this idea of opinions, and everybody's got one. So depending on who you're talking to about your idea or these things and you're looking for validation, you got to really be careful with that. And I believe so much that no matter how much we learn, think, read, listen, et cetera, in those modalities, rather than the action, which is the part I'm talking about. If you're not taking any action, there's no amount of learning and thinking about something that the first time you go to do it, it's going to be perfect. And will it ever really be perfect? Well, that's in the eye of the beholder. And so for me, it's just validate by doing, by trying, by taking that action. And you called it, I loved it, but the micro experiments or the micro projects. Like so many times we don't do anything because we're afraid to commit to things.
Right.
And so if we think, oh my gosh, if I do this and then whatever, I'm gonna have to do this forever. Like if you really hate something, then you don't need to do it forever. Like you can stop. But I think that if we start doing these experiments and little projects and just trying and then feel, how does it feel? How do I like? I mean, I've had things at times that worked really well that I hated. And I couldn't see a way around delegating or anything else. So we just stopped that because it worked. But I don't want to be miserable in life. I've had enough times of not enjoying life at all on certain levels that I don't want to live there anymore. In the world has proven in more ways than one today that we never know what's right around the corner. And so for me, if you've got something, just take that first step and just give it a try, see how it feels, and then take the next step.
Well, you just talked about the world and the craziness of the world throwing a lot of weird things at us these days. What's one change you'd like to see in the world?
I mean, I try to be one of those people. And if there's one thing I do love that Gary Vaynerchuk said is he said, rather than to build the biggest building in town, I'm going to build the biggest building and I'm not going to tear other buildings down. Which is an example of bringing something that I believe he has phenomenal things to say, much do other people. But for me, I want there to be more light shined on the positive because I truly believe in my heart of hearts that there is just as much positive as there is negative and bad. More in more ways. Like there's more positive and more good things happening than the negative. I mean, you can see on all sorts of stats of crime being down, deaths, shootings, these things all being down, kidnappings because of technology and all these things. But also the media is a glorified, shiner lighter on the negative.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's just there needs to be more of us out there shining a light on the positive. And that's really and again, I'm not naive to the fact that negative and bad and horrible things are happening. But I also just saw Peter Diamandis at this event this past weekend, billionaire, saying he doesn't read the news. He doesn't read newspapers. He's not on watching TV. He doesn't do any of that because he's not naive to know there's bad things happening. But at the same time, he doesn't need the media, which is really a glorified way to just, get viewership and ratings. And unfortunately, bad, crazy, catastrophic things can drive that far more than, somebody doing something nice for somebody. But it is what it is. But that type of level, at the billionaire level, this guy's not paying attention to that. How do you think he's going, I just started my 19th company. Yeah. It's because he's not paying attention to these things that on a lot of levels he can't control, but yet can. And that's where he's focusing his energy. He's putting his energy into what he can control and trying to make his positive impact in the world. And I believe that we all can do that. And that's the thing I'd love to see more and more continue to rise up.
That's good. What do you want your legacy to be?
It's interesting that you say that. For me, I think a lot of what I just said is really the big thing for me. I mean, for me, I've looked at my life now and everything that happened, and I don't need to put anything out into the world from the positive. Like, I don't need to put any videos out. I don't need to be on these podcasts. I don't do any of those things. I have ultimately, as a collective whole, the lifestyle that I want to have. Like my wife, we were dated for 3 years back in the day. We broke up for 2 years. Those 2 years were crazy. We got back together, and it's better than I ever thought I'd ever have with her or anybody. Wow. When I got back together with her, and like I have my health, I have all these phenomenal things. And so for me, doing any of this is just because there is an emptiness with that. It is in my DNA. It is an infection, and I love doing it. I love doing what we're doing right this second. But for me, it's because I know that I have that inside of me, and I love doing it. And so it's more of a why not. And so for me, outside of that is I just want people to be positively infected by me. Okay. But I don't, I don't have a specific thing like, oh, I want people to I just want people to, whatever I put out. I mean, there's tons of things of me out there, and hopefully those things will live on for years and years and years, that people can go back and consume and be inspired and have an aha moment and have a light bulb go off in their head to go, oh, I can go after that. I can do that. I can live the kind of life I want to live. So
we talked earlier on about how you're curating what comes in. And you just talked about that billionaire who does the same thing. He's chosen to curate. We talked about the things that you've kind of removed a little bit, but who or what inspires you that you just keep on going back to?
Yeah, I just talked about, I was on a podcast right before this, and one that pops up is there's an audiobook by Derek Sivers called Anything You Want. And I love that. He started CD Baby. I love that audiobook. It's a short listen. It's like an hour. It's just he's a no fluff kind of guy. So he doesn't, at times I find myself, I try to be more inspired and some more direction towards the fact that he's very concise and says just what needs to be said. I feel like at times I say just what needs to be said and a whole bunch more, which is, blessing and a curse. But that, and I actually do really love, some people have a love-hate with him because he can have some things that are a little, can be almost depressing actually at times. But I do really love the message out of James Altucher's Choose Yourself and Reinvent Yourself, and become good friends with him. And he's actually done the intro to my audiobook. Cool. But I really love that because that's the message. I believe that. I believe that we can choose ourselves now. We have that ability. And so for me, I feel like as a collective whole, he's one of the ones that the quote unquote negative he might throw in doesn't affect me as much as say Gary's, which is not negative, but rather, again, it's the lifestyle. And, anytime I see, honestly, the Tonys and, some of these big influential people, Gary's and that are out there, it always makes me think I'm not doing enough.
Yeah.
And I hear a lot of the people in personal development will make you feel as though you are not doing enough. You haven't achieved enough. You're not working hard enough. And for me, I don't like feeling that way, because if I really step back, I work my ass off. And if I really analyze, I really do. But at the same time, I don't want those. In my DNA isn't that right now. I love being able to almost on certain versions live a 9-to-5 lifestyle for all intents and purposes. I love, watching shows and eating dinner with my wife, watching some Hulu and watching some Netflix. I love doing that. And I don't like feeling bad because someone else is making me feel as though I should actually be, when the lights are off, baby, I'm still going. And it's whatever, good for you. If that's you, go all after it. But you know what? I don't want to feel like I've had people in tears because they feel like they're worthless, because if they breathe, then they're wasting time, or they're worthless. And I don't want to feel that way. And I never push that kind of messaging. I think we all need to find what's right for us. And that's really my big message. Find what is the right stuff for you, what success looks like, what money looks like, where you need to live for you. Don't let the fancy homes and cars. And the funny thing is, I've had a lot of these things. I was, at the peak of some of my income, I was unhappiest. I think you need to have certain levels of money.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It makes a huge difference. But at the same time, I've met all sorts of people at all levels that they could have no money and they're the happiest. They could have all the money in the world and they're the unhappiest, and everywhere in between. No money and miserable, and a ton of money and happy, whatever. So, it just find what is right for you. That's what matters. And then life can get a lot more fun and effortless and easy and enjoyable. And there'll still be difficult times and hard things, but it's a lot easier to get through them than if your life's just riddled with things you're going for other people.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned James Altucher. I'm a big fan of his list of 10 philosophies and things like that. Great material there.
Yeah. He's he's an example that anything is possible for anybody, because he's, we've joked, he does it to himself, but he's one of the quirkiest characters on the planet, I think, that I personally have connected with. And yet, for all intents and purposes, I know we categorize success sometimes. We've already talked about that, but from a financial level, he's doing fantastic. And it just shows it. He's not a like he's not ultimately like, I consider myself like on this way outgoing, lots of energy. Like he's very awkward and kind of like doesn't know whether he's coming or going sometimes, but yet it works for him because he owns it.
Yeah.
And I think own who you are, and that makes it a lot easier to stand out than if you're being something else because you think that's what's going to work.
Yeah. Absolutely. What are you currently reading, watching, or listening to? Can be anything.
Well, my phone just died, so that's going to take that away to glance up. My brain's on like overload, so like thinking things up. Well, one of the shows I do watch, this is one show that's a business show related thing, which is The Prophet. I love watching The Prophet with Marcus Lemonis. But then, gosh, I'm going to throw out a crazy one that like I watch with my wife, which is one that's over right now that people throw a total curveball that doesn't have much to do with anything. It's just kind of brainless. We sit and we watch and just enjoy it. But like, I don't know why this one came to me out of all of them. Well, Midnight Texas is one that my wife watches now that we watch together. That's on like NBC or something. But that's me. Like I kind of cover the gamut from like, I love ELO, like Electric Light Orchestra and the Cars and Journey up to bands like, Augustana and Ben Rector that are more new. Like that's kind of my life. Like I'm not this, as a whole, I will say I actually do enjoy business. And outside of that, I'm pretty chill with my wife and we go to movies all the time and, sushi and I love sushi and just chilling out. Like I don't party though, or anything like that. I just, I'm a goofy, quirky guy in and of myself, and a lot of people on these, I only get to really, it's not because I don't want to show it. It just doesn't fully, I don't know is the timing of them or whatever, but I'm a goofball, and so for me, like my dad sometimes is like, he'll see me either like you guys listen to today, or as if I have no brain in my head whatsoever. And he's like, how do you go from one extreme to the next? You're either like, you sound super intelligent, like you know exactly what's going on, down to, I don't know where you came from. And that's just, I don't know. It's just me. I love life. And, I haven't always been this way. There's so much to talk about, but, for me now, I like to live the majority of the time. It's kind of that good old 80-20, but like, 80, 90% of the time, I just want to enjoy life and be happy and do my best. And, I find it hard to have it at 100 simply because for me, I still get knocked off, man. And the reality is I can bounce back quicker, but I have days where I'm very irritable. I'm going to be a jerk probably, ultimately, all that kind of stuff, but I don't live there. I think it's when you live there and aren't that, which I don't know that anybody, I think there might be people who kind of are, but there's deeper rooted things. But at the end of the day, I think there are people who live as a jerk or not friendly or whatever. There's a lot going on there, but most people aren't, of course. And, for me, I'm not in any of that, but there's been times where I lived in that kind of state for way longer than necessary. And now it's just a matter of I just don't try to live in those places very long at all. And I know how to squash it as quick as possible. But sometimes it can be a week, Yeah. So
I end every episode with this final question. It's one of my favorite things to ask anyone I ever meet. And that's, what is one dream you're still wanting to fulfill in your own life?
You said one. I'd love to go to space actually someday.
Oh, that's cool. We haven't had anyone say that so far. So
okay, cool. There we go. I stick out. Yeah, I would, and and I guess ultimately, the other one, full transparency, I don't make my full living talking, so I'll leave that there. Ultimately, I have the lifestyle overall that I want, but because of some shifts, which maybe we'll have a part 2 someday, but, I don't make my full living gabbing. And that was something that ultimately I'm shifting, and I've pretty much been able now to make anything that I've want, if that's in reason. Like I could probably go to space. I guess obviously people have, but I'm not fully so passionate about it that the ways that are currently available that I'm willing to do. But
you're looking for the tourist method,
I'm looking for the tourist method. Exactly. So that's perfect. But no, the other way is full within my control. There is zero doubt in my mind that it will be achieved. It's only a matter of when. So.
Cool deal. Thanks so much for sharing your story with us. It truly is an inspiration, and I love your honesty and transparency. So thanks for opening up your life to all of us.
Awesome, man. I appreciate you having me on. Hope everybody enjoyed that. So,
once again, I want to thank today's guest, Michael Gebben, for taking time out to share his story. You can check out more about Michael at takemia.com, or you can swing on over to jumblethink.com and check out the episode notes to all the links of where you can find Michael. Our guest on Thursday's episode is Christos Shepard. He is the co-founder of Campfire, super cool app. Can't wait to share that with you. He's been on BBC World Service, CNN, Financial Times, The Economist, and so many other places. He even fronted his own TV show in China. He even started and sold his own airline, Air Malaysia, and he's helped governments and entrepreneurs in Africa start and launch their own airline brands. This is a super fun episode. You're going to love it. Make sure to check it out this Thursday. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope that this episode has really encouraged you to chase that big idea and dream and create the world you want to live in.
Vous êtes une autre personne. Les mères de famille, les enfants, peuvent également prendre un moment revitalisant dans quelques mois, lorsque vous aurez bien saisi la technique et que vous serez maître de votre corps. Vous pourrez vous décontracter même en travaillant.